Hey everybody, welcome to another essential conversation here at Wellbeings. And today we have Penny with us, Penny Jarrett. And Penny's going to start, and we're going to talk about a lot of things today. But first of all, thank you, Penny, for being here.
Thank you for having me. Really, really honored and looking forward to it. So yeah, thanks.
Wow. And well, yeah, we're going to, there's so much like where do I start? But what we will start is to share like Penny's been on quite a journey, and a journey where she really realized that by healing her brain, she was able to heal her heart. She was able to really shift. So when it was many years ago now, when Penny was diagnosed with adult ADHD and CPTSD, what age were you then when that diagnosis came in, Penny?
I was 30 when I was diagnosed with ADHD, and then I think I was still 30, but it was about a year later that I got diagnosed with CPTSD. Maybe just under a year. Yeah.
Yeah, I can imagine, how that lands, but then you get a second. It's like you get a left hook and then you get a right hook, and like what to do with all of this? So that's exactly what Penny had to first deal with. What is this? What does this mean? So she spent quite a lot of time really educating herself, and to grow awareness and to raise awareness for herself, and then to also raise awareness for others, and the stigmas attached to these disorders, these particular cluster of symptoms in a way, and offer support and tools to others who may feel like they're underperforming or distancing themselves from reality or struggling for reasons that they don't understand. And it's like Penny is a mental health and wellness writer, creator, and mentor who's extremely passionate about helping others understand and love themselves. Now that just feels what a lovely job, and so that they can live joyful, peaceful, fulfilled lives free from the weight and the blockages attached to past pains and current sort of emotional and mental challenges. And this is so. So when I hear you been able to do that, it sounds almost that you haven't said it there, but you're like a therapist. Whoa, hold on a second. There's an echo here. Um, Let me just double check something.
We're hearing you in a few seconds later.
That should be it. I do like the sound of my own voice, but enough is enough.
Not while
So when we've worked through that, again, I'm demonstrating as a host how imperfect I am at times, but don't be struggle so much to have it all neat and tidy. So yeah, feeling into that space, like what was that time like for you, Penny, when, at 30 years of age, in comes these diagnoses? What was going on at that time for you that made you end up in a doctor's room and he was giving you this diagnosis?
Yeah, well, so it's around 6 years ago, and I had been on a kind of light journey of trying to clear out my life. Like I could feel that a lot of the intentions I had, and a lot of the ways that I saw myself being and the things that I wanted to do, and there were days when I felt like her, but there were some where I just didn't. I just felt like that version of myself was just like another person, like a distant. I felt like I was kind of my own worst enemy in some ways, because I would, and it can sound really light now, and maybe it doesn't, but when I think about the grand scheme of things, like making plans or writing, at the beginning of the month, a kind of list of things that I need to do to get my head straight, to clear up my environment, to get on the path that I'm meant to be, and then just not sticking to any of it. It was almost like I didn't want to. It was like almost like a side of me didn't care, didn't want to do any of that stuff. And this was going on for quite some time. I just weren't kind of moving in the direction that I wanted to go. And so I started to kind of clean up my life. I started to cut down on partying, cut down on substance misuse, and cut down on all the things that I was doing that weren't in line with that version of me, that were obviously interfering and catching me off guard on the days that I wanted to be her. And so I started doing that. I started spending a lot more time alone. I started spending deliberate time in prayer and deliberate time trying to really look at what it is, like why I feel certain ways about relationships, why, although I'm over some of the bad things that have happened to me and I'm not scared and I'm not, super sad anymore, why I can't move forward and use all of my experiences in the ways that I want to, writing books, helping people, doing stuff with youth. I would do it, but there was just something, something that I weren't fully myself. And during this time, clearing up my life, I started to feel a little bit worse. Like when I didn't have all of these coping mechanisms that weren't that good for me, when I was kind of cleaning up my life, I started to be really present with some of my thoughts. And some of them I noticed were just odd. And they sound, again, just having thoughts like, I don't know, these ones are silly, but and some of them aren't, of course. But some of the thoughts that I noticed of mine were that when everything was going well, I wouldn't feel comfortable. I would find that I would sit down and think about people I love the most and picture something bad happening to them, just to sit there with that fear and that negative panic, and I would search for them. So of course there were times where I'd have intrusive thoughts and I'd try and fight them off, but there were times when I would look for them because I was at peace. It's like I weren't comfortable, and I clocked that one and I was like, okay, could probably do with talking to someone about this. And it wasn't until a period of noticing some of these things, it wasn't until I had a few days spread out, but where I, trigger warning, but for the first time, despite everything bad I'd been through, it was the first times I understood why people took their own lives. I just had this stuck feeling. I had this feeling of nothing. And some days I just didn't feel anything. I didn't feel compassion. I didn't feel excitement. I didn't feel all of the things that I feel so strongly. I didn't feel it. And so in those moments, I understood why people would think, what's the point in being here? It's boring or it's rubbish, and I weren't suicidal, but I got it. And I never had before. Like I'd never understood how it gets that bad. I definitely empathized and my heart went out to anybody that did, but I'd never my mind had never gone there. And so when this happened, there was a time when I verbalized it. I kind of just said to someone, like, I feel nowhere. I feel nothing. I feel like I know where I am, but it doesn't look familiar. Like I kind of know where to go, but I don't really know this place. And it was that feeling that my friend kind of flagged and said that, that's not light. That's not a normal kind of thing to feel. And then when my period came the day after, she was like, do you know what? When I think about it, you've said stuff like this the day before your period twice now. And you've said to me, how strange that the day before my period, I feel like this. And so I remembered in that moment that a lot of women go through very different feelings, around the time of their period. And I had never noticed that in my own life. I'd never been someone and if I had, I probably wouldn't notice because I was, recreationally using drugs and drinking and smoking and doing whatever. So I wouldn't know if my moods were coming or going. But because I was clearing everything out, I was able to see. And so I thought, okay, there's a hormonal thing going on here. And I went to see someone who specialized in hormones and nutrition around hormones. And whilst it's quite strange because that side of things, the hormones, has come back around for me later on in life. And I now see the importance of that and where maybe going down that route could have been as helpful in some ways. But it was that moment where coincidentally, the guy that I was went to see said, after speaking to me for an hour, I feel like you could possibly have ADHD. And he said, I'm not a specialist in that area, but my wife and my daughter do have it. And I'm just seeing them in you right now, in everything you're saying. And so, you know, I would say 97% sure. I was like, that's a strange number. So he just advised me what to do. So I went to see an ADHD specialist, and yeah, I got diagnosed with severe combined ADHD. And it's funny because on this journey now, like I knew nothing about ADHD. I thought, like many people, that it was something that just attention-seeking boys had. And I say boys because I didn't ever associate it with girls. In school, it was only ever talked about if a boy was the type that would like kick things over or pick chairs up and just randomly dash them. And so I was like, okay, this means he's got an attention deficit. I didn't know the rest. And so I was like, okay, so he's hyper because he doesn't get attention at home. And so he wants to get it at school and doesn't know how to do that. So he lashes out. That's what I thought ADHD was. So I had couldn't get my head around why anyone would think I had that when I didn't do anything like that. I mean, I've had my moments, but I mean, I weren't showing them in that hour talk. And so the reason I'm kind of going back around is because when I went to see the ADHD specialist, one of the things that he said to me is, you have we spoke for ages, and I found it really uncomfortable because it was the first time that, he wasn't a therapist. He didn't have tact around talking about trauma, but he obviously knew that, you have to ask certain questions about someone's past. So this guy who is an ADHD specialist asked me these very blunt questions about the trauma I might have experienced. And so for the first time as well, I had dug up all of this stuff that I didn't speak about in this way. I was never asked it without softness or empathy or care attached, a slight sensitivity. He was just to the point, like, and I'd tell him something absolutely devastating, and he'd just like, okay, so, and go on to the next question. And I was just like floored. I was like, I'm just giving too much here. Like, this is just too much. And so at the end, he said, you do have, attention deficit and hyperactivity, the two ADHDs, the two sides. So you've got combined, and you've got it quite severely. So it's only really going to be medication that's going to help. Because I was asking, I just want some CBT. I'd heard about CBT, didn't know what it was, but heard it can help. And he was like, so that's not going to help you. You are going to need medication, but you also we need to talk about all of this trauma. And I was like, we've just spoken about all of this trauma. Excuse me, sir, but no. You've just said I've got this thing that requires a thing. I'm not going to take the thing, medication, but I'm not going there with the trauma stuff again because you opened me up and did nothing with it. I'm now left raw. I can't wait to get out of here. And so let's just talk about the ADHD. I don't want to go there again. It's like my valuable pain. Yeah, that's how I saw it, that all these memories I was holding on to that I hadn't really told anyone, I'd just given them all to you and you'd done nothing with them. We all want that empathy and that soft space for it to land. And I didn't know that was happening at the time. I just was like, well, you've just said I've and I'd researched ADHD before my appointment because it was a long waiting list. So I was like, you've just confirmed what I know. I know about this thing. I've researched it. It is showing up in my life. I do have these traits and symptoms. Okay, I'm scared of medication and I'm not going to take medication because in my eyes, because mental health and mental health medication weren't ever spoken about in a normal way around me, not in school, not in uni, not in anywhere I'd worked. And so from films and TV shows I'd seen and soaps and stuff, the people that had mental health issues that took medication, they were kind of like in a vegetable state. And they were kind of like not themselves. And there was all these stigmas attached that I had just thought, I'm not going to take the medication. I've come this far. I've got a few things I need to sort out. But if I really work on them and figure out how to do it, I'm sure there's another route. So anyway, he just said, okay, well, when you are ready to take medication, come back. And I was just kind of throwing a bit of a tantrum. So he gave me a prescription for medication. I said, what I decided was, I had a little scheme. I was like, okay, I'm gonna pretend to take this medication. I'm gonna go and pick it up just in case he has a link with the chemist and he needs to see. I'm gonna come back, tell him it didn't work, and then he can give me the CBT or the other version of support. I'm just gonna pretend it didn't work. I'm not even gonna take it. And so I did that. I went and picked up the medication, didn't take it, and just started researching how people manage ADHD without medication. And so, yeah, that's where it all began. And the reason I've gone into detail about that is because it's crazy. When I started to look at my diet, the things I was eating, I was looking at the way that I manage my time, the way that I don't know how to judge time well, the way that, I looked at all the kind of traits and symptoms that I was leaning on now, like, yes, that wasn't me. That was ADHD. I'm not flaky. That was ADHD. I'm not, super forgetful. My brain's different. So I was like getting great comfort from this label that helped me to understand myself and helped me to know that this is something that I'm part of something. There's other people that have this. Yeah, I've been through a lot, and it's all, scary, embarrassing stuff that I don't really like talking about in case people look down on me or pity me. And so I knew that the stuff I'd been through had altered me to a degree, sorry. But it was just great knowing that there was also this bracket that a lot of my quirks and flaws fell under as well, that I could concentrate on and learn about and take control of without having to talk about all that sad stuff that he clearly didn't, appreciate me talking about enough. And again, sorry, I've not made this the full circle I was meant to, but the reason I've gone into so much detail about that is because now, as a coach and trying to support people and just on my journey, I actually tell everyone who comes to me and says, Penny, I think I've got ADHD, what do I do? And I forget how hard it was for me in that moment, but I'm like, look, we need to talk about trauma first. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm never going to take your trauma and ask you loads of questions and then just sit with them like he did. But it's so important to, because when I, after months of managing ADHD by my diet, and like I said, use, all these different ways I learned to manage it, I'd understand it and just be softer with myself so I could laugh through some of it. There was a short space of time where lots of traumatic things happened. And I couldn't manage, I couldn't do anything. All this motivation I had, all this eating the right things, all of this managing my time and embrace it was gone. I was just gone. Like I couldn't think straight. I was on the sofa, couldn't really do much. I guess I was in a depressed state and I didn't know. And it was in that time that I got, and that, again, I could go on and on, but we can see how I go on and on. Then I got diagnosed with CPTSD, and it made so much sense. And the thing that hit me, and this is where I, understood why that doctor said, well, we have to address the trauma. And it's why I now am not, I used to encourage everyone, if you're going through this, you could have ADHD, go on, you could learn about yourself, you could learn to understand and love yourself. But then when I got diagnosed with CPTSD and I noticed that, hold on, most of the traits that made me identify with ADHD, which led to me being diagnosed with ADHD, are the exact same traits that fell under the CPTSD diagnosis that led to me getting diagnosed with that. It's just that I went into that doctor's thing saying, these bad things have happened and I can't move. I can't think. I can't manage my ADHD. I can't work, and they were like, okay, well, looking at your symptoms, looking at what you've been through, you've got really bad CPTSD. This is what's happening. And so it's interesting because they do look similar. And I do wonder sometimes, and the reason I learned to heal my broken heart by, working on fixing my brain, and the other way around, because the broken heart came first. And it was how I learned to, people describe and it's a back in the day thing, but it's carried on. But people used to describe the ADHD brain as broken. It's a broken brain. It's, you know, we don't use language like that so much now, but that's what it's called. It's the brain doesn't work the same. It doesn't produce the same chemicals. People with ADHD think different. So if I was told I had a broken brain, then by actually taking that time to look at the trauma and actually heal the broken heart, go back and, you know, reparent my inner child, love on her, comfort her, you know, and go through all of that, then it was like, do I have a broken brain? Do I, you know? And so it goes both ways. And I'm not, you know, it's just, I understood. I just wish that psychiatrist had a little bit of people skills, because that would have helped.
Well, let's take a pause, Penny, for a minute, because what a share there! What a really powerful share, and the struggle around diagnosis, and you know, I don't think it was a broken brain. I think it was a brain that had to be was adapting to anxiety and stress. It was a survival mechanism. You know, our brain changes when we fall in love. Our brain changes when we take on a new position in a job. Our brain changes whenever we look at all the big people around us when we're small, and we learn to adapt to that environment, or to what's there or what's not there in that environment. So I think, yeah, I really think it's just a brain that was overwhelmed by what it was experiencing, and it was just adapting, and you then changed your environment in a way. You were able to be in spaces that were responsive, that were reliable, that were safe, and to share, talk, and feel, which is why it felt so abrupt and almost abrasive when you first went in, where it was very, you know, very heady and very matter of fact, and no real consideration for, you know, how the sharing was for you, and how jarring that was for your system. So to find you, whether it's, you know, it's, I hear anxiety. I hear there was just so much anxiety in the system, and through your journey, you were able to allow space. You know, as you were sharing, I was thinking, wow, wouldn't it have been amazing if these professionals would say, okay, well, let's have a CPTSD or an ADHD group where we bring lots of people together and let them sit down and talk about it, and let them share around their struggles and their challenges, so that, again, they get. I also loved how you felt relief by having something that you go, oh, that explains it a little bit. I'm not going crazy, you know, like the relief of that. How important it is to educate and to let people know that, you know, like, and for our viewers watching, you know, like, who doesn't go through phases when they're young where I want it but I don't want it, you know, that sort of, I want it but I sabotage it. I have all these things I want to be, but then I do lots of things that stop me from being that, or where I just feels like my mind is getting overwhelmed and I can't think properly, or I'm like, just that hardness, and how we have a difficulty in dealing with ordinary struggles, how it elevates and amplifies the sort of impact internally. So anybody listening who feels that they have something about how they think or how they feel or how they deal with the ordeals of life, the ups and downs, loves and losses, if they're struggling, you know, definitely do reach out to the links below to check in with Penny, just to see, or do your own research as well. But we need people. You know, we can do our research, but we should go and speak to someone if we're struggling. What was one thing, Penny, that stands out? There was a relating style or a type of behavior that stands out from way back then, when you think back to that time, late 20s, early 30s, when something that you would, whether you want to put it under the umbrella of ADHD or CPTSD, what was one style or one thing when you look back and say, okay, that's what that's clear. I was, you know, maybe it was anxiety, maybe it was tension, maybe it was not being able to sleep at night time, maybe it was really not dealing well with breakups, you know, in relationships. Like, I'm curious, what was one thing that stands out from that time, just to help our viewers identify with one thing that they might be suffering from.
An absolutely painful fear of rejection and abandonment. And that, not knowing it was that, not knowing that that was the kind of energy behind a lot of my decisions. So not opening up in relationships, not being myself, not going for certain opportunities, not relaxing in relationships or situations that could be safe, not feeling worthy, feeling like I had to always prove myself, feeling like I had to always be so much for people just to be accepted. All of those behaviors were behind the thing behind it was I was petrified of rejection and abandonment.
Yeah, and that's, let me just pause there for a minute, Penny, because that's so powerful, because it leads to so many other things: overextension, overcompensation, becoming a superwoman, trying to take on everything, caretaking, rescuing, needing to compensate the deficit of feeling whatever that is less than. So there's always, and then so that the stress that causes of needing to be more creates its own plethora of sort of challenges physically and mentally. And to be, because of the loss, because when the child was young, and this is for everybody watching, like when we're young as children, like we can assess, okay, well, I'm feeling really insecure right now with this experience of helplessness, of feeling rejected or abandoned. And we can make lots of decisions as a child, how to deal with that. But one adaptation to that is, I will never feel that again.
Oh, that's it. That was the force behind so much of my, closed behavior. And some people wouldn't have ever described me as being closed, because I have always been so loving, but it's always wanting to give people what I didn't have, or always wanting to just be like, just feeling like I had to be everything. I just wanted to, like you said, I just wanted to rescue everyone. I wanted to be everything to them.
Do you hear that, guys? Just for our viewers again, Penny, you're just sharing so much gold right now. I wanted to be everything for almost everybody. And anybody out there, we might have watched and observed our mothers do this, or our grandmothers do this. I'll use women, men do it as well. I've done it, but generally speaking, we often see a lot of women with the selflessness, and we learn that as a way of living, or as a way of behaving, or a way of relating. And when the child was young and they made the decision, I never want to feel this pain again, and that was the false belief that was believable, that, okay, to be secure means not to feel these feelings. And then you go through a life, like working really hard, being everything that we think the others want us to be, which is terribly lonely because they never see who we really are. We are in constant display mode, displaying, not revealing. So it's a very lonely road. And most of the mothers I work with, who spend a lifetime in this sort of selfless service or selfless giving, they're very, very depressed. They're very anxious. You ask them, are they okay? They'll say, how are you? There's a real holding of pain and suffering that you could call almost every, like you could diagnose it as 100 different things.
And this is the hard bit is there is such a joy in giving as well. So there's such a joy attached to meeting someone's need, to being a blessing when someone's having a bad day, to helping someone get up on their feet when they feel like they're lost and they've got nowhere to go, to helping, it elevates someone to a next level. There's joy attached to that. But when you're doing it from an empty place, when you feel like your main goal in life is to not be a burden so that you're never abandoned, or to not, when you act like that, you give and you feel you get your own rushes from giving, but then you're scared to act, you're scared to show the needs you have. And so when you're being that to everyone, then you almost don't have any needs. Of course you do, deep down inside, but they never come up because you never let them out, because there's not one person you meet that you relax into, because you just don't. And it's what you said, I don't ever want to be a burden to anyone. I don't ever want anyone to have a reason to kick me out or leave me or go. So I will do everything. I will be everything. And it's just, you know, you just get empty, you know, and you're running on empty. And there's only by the grace of God that I was able to do it for so many years. But then I had to pause and realize what was happening.
This is
resentful and you know.
That's it, because the reality is, doesn't matter if you're the Dalai Lama, if you're overextending and overcompensating for long enough, there's a sort of, because again, we got to go backwards to where is it coming from? Where is the overextension coming from? Because when it's coming from the adapted child, the little young child part of us that learned when we were very young that this is what we need to be to survive this environment, then it's the compensation. And it's so lovely to get that, like when we're really young and we goo-goo and we smile and our parents smile back at us and we go, wow, that's smart to do, that if I do this, then I'm going to elicit this feeling in them, and that's like good. So when it's coming from the child place, we it's really about the old survival strategy. But when we can do it from an adult place where we're not doing it to fill ourselves up, we're not doing it with an ulterior motive of, wow, like needing that validation from them, needing that recognition from them, needing to constantly be in that sort of energy of displaying, so that we're like this, we want to be like this bottle of perfume and we want to be picked up off the shelf. And it's so exhausting because to display and not to really show who we are. And you know, I know this one very well, because when I was a young man, I was a masseuse for a long time. And I remember my first 3 years of being a massage therapist, I couldn't charge anybody. I worked for free. And I would I was so uncomfortable for someone to say, I want to give you money for what you've just done, because it was so lovely. It was like, I felt so insecure. I had so little self-esteem. I was all other esteem, which was my esteem was based on how people responded to the things I did. And even then I couldn't let it in. So it was like fool's gold. I was doing all these things and giving all these things to get them to say, oh yeah, like you're amazing, or like that was the best massage ever. But inside, I couldn't even receive it. So it was a real stage of poverty in my life. And I can really identify with that. And you know, like as you started to heal through the CPTSD, what were some of the things that helped you get that solid ground to be able to grow awareness around, you know, slowly opening to let people see you and feel your needs, and to also pull back from having to be Mother Teresa for everybody?
It's interesting because you spoke about, you know, believing something and running with it. And so one of the other things that I also did is, because I lost my mum when I was 15, and I was in denial for a while that it even happened. I just thought, that's not true. She hasn't died. No. And so when I realized it was, and I was actually in a really abusive relationship at the time. I was only young and I didn't get to really, you know, my hope was kind of just one day my mom's going to call me and be like, hey, and I was like, oh. And I used to have dreams all the time. They were like, I was like, people think that you've died. And she's like, I know, I'm back though. You know, I'd have all these dreams that would, through the horrible relationship I was going through, it was kind of keeping me going. But when that relationship ended, when I was 21, I started to miss my mum. Like a sentence went into my mind, and it was that I don't have a mum. And I'd never heard it as clear as that. And it just hit me so hard that I decided I will never miss anyone again. Like during that, you know, this happened before then. I would obviously kind of establish that, because I hadn't seen her in a long time. I'd established it. But when it really hit me that I wouldn't miss anyone again, it's quite strange being someone who wants to be everything to everyone. But then if because they don't want to be abandoned, but then if they were, they wouldn't really give two hoots because they don't miss people, you know? And so I was like, that you said, fool's gold. I was like trying my hardest to be accepted and loved, but if I wasn't, wouldn't give two hoots anyway, because I don't miss people. Boop, gone, all right. Do you know? And of course I was sad. Of course I valued my relationships, but I wasn't going to miss anyone. That's an emotion I was never going to feel again. And so with the understanding this, with the seeing where the thought patterns, the way that the development of my brain and my way had been disrupted through the dysfunction I was living in as a child, the things I experienced and witnessed, and then being in my own really abusive relationship from 15 to 21, which quite important years, you know. When I clocked that, it was figuring out what these lies were and working on them. And I had to do a lot of it alone, literally. And you wouldn't know, I didn't know exactly what I was doing. All I knew is that the only thing I wanted to really do is be alone, being creative, listening to music that made me feel emotion so I could cry, reading back on old diaries, writing about how I'm feeling, reading my mum's old diaries, and spending time in prayer and you know, and figuring out what you know, it just all happened organically in that time, that like consecrated time alone, where I weren't trying to be Miss Popularity. I weren't trying to be fun and outgoing and everyone's everything. I was just trying to be comfortable in my own presence and figure out who I really am. And yeah, it was in that time that I got, and things would happen, you know. We say, and we know healing can you know, you can begin to heal from things. You can be letting go of things for years. You can see things pop up for years and let go of them. But at this point, I was having memories that were related to behavior patterns day after day. I would sit down and I would paint, or I would be, you know, put on, again, like I said, music that let me feel. Sometimes the words weren't even relevant to my situation, but I really could feel stuff when I would sing or even mime, and just get it out and cry and remember the last time I cried like this, and go back and because I never used to cry either, and just going through that and seeing myself and writing it all down. And it was so beautiful. And don't get me wrong, that was a beautiful time. It was like a year and a half of doing that. And then, you know, things happen. Like you said, you can have your job change, or you get into a relationship, and then it's like you have to start from scratch because new things come up. Doing it alone's one thing, but being faced with life when you feel like you're this new empowered, healed person, and you've got to start from scratch, but with people.
Yeah, Penny, I want to come in here because you just shared something. I want to pause it and reframe it for the viewers here, because it's so important, you know, because when we talked about needs earlier, you know, and how you learn not to have them or not show them, and then how you learn to need to be more to compensate the loss and the not having the needs. What I hear that year and a half you were doing, you were letting go of needing to be special, and you allowed yourself to discover your ordinary uniqueness. You know, you're bathing in that, like you're letting go of having to be more. So then you delved into the ordinariness of your ordinary struggles here, and through that you start to find who you are. Like some of your best bits are in amongst that grieving, and that's why I loved how you called it a beautiful time. Now, let me share with the viewers here that any beautiful time like that, it's also you're getting in touch with some of the pain as much as you're getting in touch with the realizations or the eureka moments, or those aha moments where you've been able to make little links to, oh, yes, I did that, and oh, that's because of that, and oh, I see that, and Jesus, my mother used to do that too, or whatever it is, and just to be able to start thinking about your thinking.
Yeah.
So healing to call our thoughts into question, not just speak our thoughts out loud, because that's not what I'm talking about. It's about thinking about your thinking. It's so powerful. And then to allow your body to go through the grieving process, you know, what the child could never do, because she learned to be very adapted and altered to avoid the pain. And that beautiful time that I think, you know, whether you do it with a therapist or you have to come into a relationship at some time with it, but to have that time for you being with yourself wow, it really warms my heart. Just like letting go of the survival strategy and being able to get into that ordinary suffering and grief, and to be able to, yeah, call your thoughts in and like open your heart to these, to have needs again, to be able to give yourself, if that makes sense. Beautiful.
Yeah. And it was.
And so what happened when you went into relationships? Like what was some of the I suppose, what was one thing that became clear that that was something to work on, that you discovered after that period, whenever you came out of the cave and you came out into the world?
I guess the main thing that I noticed was that in the things that I struggled with in my relationship, and it was the first relationship where I had already dealt with lots of stuff. I weren't just, I knew that I had to live it all. And I knew that I wanted this to be my last relationship, like, romantic relationship. But something that I found interesting was that whilst I'd been in my first ever serious relationship was the one that was just demonic, just so bad. I found that the things I struggled with and the things that used to trigger me weren't necessarily associated to, weren't always, predominantly they were associated with my lack of being nurtured as a child rather than the abuse I went through in that relationship. So you would have probably thought that, that would be my main trigger. But what I found is that in a lot of the things that I struggled with, or a lot of the emotions that I struggled with, I was trying to learn to communicate my needs. I was shocked enough seeing that I had them, seeing that I wanted more time from someone. I wanted more attention and more care. I didn't ever notice that in relationships. I would never admit, or the feeling would never come close enough to my awareness to know that I wanted more attention and love and softness from someone. That wouldn't be something that I would ever identify in a relationship before. But so realizing that I wanted that, but then also having a lot of my childhood trauma come up in that, in wanting that, in needing that, because it reminded me, like a lot of the feelings I was having reminded me of times I'd been scared or neglected as a child. There were a few times where I would be trying to protect myself or feeling like I had to protect myself from picking the wrong person or being with an abusive person. But I weren't with an abusive person. So that they weren't the traits I didn't have to kind of be on guard for that. But what was happening is I was having emotional flashbacks to my childhood. So I was having moments where I felt like a 6-year-old who was home alone and screaming for the letterbox and didn't know when my mum would be back. I felt like that in moments. And this could have been because he had gone, to the shop without me. And I had said, go alone. I'm 30 odd. I was never feeling abandoned by him, but again, we were building our relationship in lockdown, I guess. So when things started opening and he had to go like further, somewhere far that he might not be around me for a few hours, I had moments where I was screaming inside and it came out. And I don't know if it was fear of him never coming back and something bad happening to him. I don't know if because the fear wasn't obvious, but it was like trapped in my throat. And I would just, the way that I remember that was like watching a little girl who'd been left home alone and didn't know what would happen next, And so
it felt like you were coming through, through the intimacy that you had created in the relationship, the good enough safety that you were creating in the relationship. You were getting in touch with what you buried underneath the superwoman and you were starting to feel the very things you said, I'm never going to feel that. I'm never going to feel that helplessness. I'm never going to feel that sort of loneliness or that abandonment or that rejection, to allow yourself to feel that as we mature. If we have experienced that as children, is essential for the development. And it's definitely like I'm really feeling your heart of how that must have been. And just, that's just the next layer, it's like, I remember had a really interesting older therapist, and he said to me, he says, if you want to feel loneliness, enter into a relationship, because it'll help us get in touch with those young parts sometimes that feel so irrational or so emotional and so overwhelming. That's what I hear. I hear there was a good enough intimacy, and a good enough safety where you were able to start to feel that. Wow.
Yeah. And again, like you've just said it, and it's hit, it's hit me again as you said that. But I guess the last time I, loved someone enough to be scared of losing them was my mum. Yeah. And when she, before she passed away, like the lifestyle was that, there were times where she'd go out and not come back for a couple of days, and I would be scared and not knowing what, even I'm petrified. That's my mum. She was a single parent. She was everything to me. And so with him and him going out, and again, I had never felt that since then. And because it was so hard and scary, and also it was an uncomfortable feeling, because if I remembered it as an adult, which I didn't remember some of these instances, I didn't remember waiting at the letterbox. That had left me until this point, because I would never want to admit out, not even out loud, never out loud, but I wouldn't even want to remember that my mum did that. I would never want to remember that she did that. So I was never, ever thinking about it. It was gone. I disassociated from that person a long time ago. But with him and it coming up, and it physically pain. I was screaming inside, and then I let it out, and I hadn't heard that since I was a child, and I remembered it. Yeah, I was back there.
Yeah, you were. That's it. Like, and again, for our viewers watching, like we all, children can't deal with high levels of stress, so they learn to make decisions to bury them, avoid them. They get they have such great ingenuity how to adapt. And one way is to almost like disown parts of our past, so you don't have to you don't really forget them, but you put them out of sight. They're not in your frontal awareness. They're like really locked up in a box in the garage, until there comes a time where you feel safe, or you have enough solid ground in your life that you can weather the storm of that grief. And I do, and to all the people listening, like I really feel that, I come from a part of the world in Ireland where grief was, is something that, sometimes it's hard for people to feel emotions. And kind of you came from England, right? And so it's like very, very similar. But it's one of the main things that can set you free, is, to allow yourself to have safe spaces where you can come in and talk about, or put words to that young, as you named it so wonderfully there, Penny, that place where you couldn't say it out loud and you didn't even want to think about it. Because if there's anybody watching and you remember something like that happening, or realizing that's how you deal with stress, that's really impacting your relationships with yourself, with your partner, with your children, if you have kids, with your friendship groups. There's something, if that's it, if there's something like that's happened in the past, my invitation is to move towards someone, or hear the things that Penny has done that's allowed her to, be where she is today. And, so in the pandemic, how did you work through that? Did that just keep, it started to have its crescendo and its apex, and then it started to settle a little bit with these sort of experiences of allowing him to leave a little bit longer, a little bit longer, a little bit longer? How is that now for you? Because are you still with the same young man?
Yeah.
Congratulations.
Thank you. And yeah, there are still things that come up for me that I can see come from that place of fear. But it's got so much better. Like even up until, the last time he traveled without me, I just broke down into tears at the airport. I was just anxious and angry for the whole day until he went. And then I just broke down into tears, and I couldn't understand why, because I didn't feel that fear, but I did a little bit, but it weren't uncontrollable. It was just, it was just a bit of a, I don't even like to word it, but what if I never see him again? I still do have that. I still do have that fear of it being the last time I see someone, because it's I don't know. I want to say it's normal, but it's not healthy. It's not something I want to run with. But the most recent time I didn't, and there was none of that. Nothing of the sort. Like, I miss him. I look forward to when speaking, and I'm excited. I didn't have it at all. And that was like, I think about 4 months apart, or maybe a bit more in those instances. So even that, and that was really recently, because he's traveling now. So that was like the other day that I realized, like, I don't have it. Like, I'm a bit apprehensive, like, before he's traveling, I'm like, are you going away soon? Just as a like, because we're always together. But I didn't feel like I could breathe, and I didn't need to send him loads of messages to make sure they got delivered, so to tell me that the plane hadn't exploded or something, which was the kind of behaviors I was doing before. Not able to sleep, just thinking it was my job to pray all night. And I didn't have it this time. And so even that in itself is just, yeah, it takes time. And again, I was aware of it. There was times where I couldn't bear the thought of him going. I couldn't think straight. And then there was a time, like I said, where I was anxious and angry all day, because for me, being scared is not a comfortable feeling. So I usually turn it into anger or anxiety. So fear is never welcomed. And then I just cried at the airport, like, but this time nothing. So yeah.
This is great. Yeah. Again, for anybody out there who has tendency, we would call that sort of hysteric behavior, where you're, future projecting the worst thing to happen. And as if there's something looming in the hedge that's ready to bounce out, that's to scare you, or coming to get you, or often the what I hear from my clients is it's coming to take something away from you, something that's going to leave you. Again, if that's your sort of orientation, again, find a safer place, a therapist, reach out to Penny, reach out to our network. It doesn't have to be like that. There's a way we have to understand where that's coming from. That's like a coping strategy, like smoking a cigarette. It's like it's a response. It's responding to. It's too terrifying to feel the fear, so I'll actually create more fear in the process of the defense. It's quite interesting. And wow, this has been so enriching as I hear your story, Penny, and I can imagine the viewers are going to be relating to this in a very deep way. And for my own personal life at the moment, I relate to this. I really love my wife, and I'm like kind of joint at the hip sometimes, and I'm trying to pull away to go away on a men's weekend, and it's and I look at my past. I look at my past around that, and I can tell myself, well, I'm just so in love, and it's like it's all good, and like this is really healthy. But the reality is, there's a little part of me fearful that she'll not be able to be okay without me, or some grandiose sort of belief like that to protect the sort of vulnerability.
Yeah.
So anyway, I planned it, and I'm heading off on a weekend with my friend up the mountains, and so I'm going off to assess how I feel, like how you felt in the airport. So I'll give you some feedback on that when we speak again. But again, everybody, like, you know what, as Penny is really sharing here, that she has had struggles from her past, that then she learned to like just like block out to survive, which we all do, some version of that, some version of that. And then as you get older and you go through life, then troubles start to, you know, come knocking on your door. How you feel internally, how you perceive things, how you deal with struggles and upsets and loves and losses. And then it becomes more clear, some of what served you when you were younger doesn't really serve you so much now. It was actually very inventive back then, but now it's like, it's destructive.
It will always come up. At some point, it will always come up. So yeah.
And, so for the, like, where can I share this? Like, how can, you know, as we're winding down here now, Penny, what would you say to someone who's listening to this and feels into some of the things that they resonate with? What would you say to them? What do you recommend?
I would say the first thing that I would do is spend some time writing about how you feel. Just writing about it. And if you don't enjoy writing, just recording yourself, just getting it out. You don't, you know, you don't have to. Some people can be so apprehensive about reaching out to someone. And of course, if you reach out to someone that has been through similar, it's great. You know, there's a lot of bouncing off you can do, but there's nothing like really sitting with yourself and getting stuff out. And so even if, and just as an idea, because sometimes I want to do this when I'm feeling some type of way, but I don't know where to start. And so sometimes I just start with, I don't know where to start today, but I know I need to figure out how I'm feeling. And then I just see what comes. And you can even start with, I was listening to Penny on a podcast today, and what she said that resonated with me, or the reason I want to try writing about how I feel is because this came to my memory. And just go. You will write things and say things that you didn't know you felt, that you didn't remember. How often do we check in with ourselves? How often do you just ask yourself every day, how are you feeling and why? We don't. It's not something we do. We just go with it, and things leak into other days. But I would say do that. Write down why this is resonating for you. Write down what you felt, you know, and get into a habit of doing that every day. It is one, you will learn things about yourself that you can actually let go of that day. And sometimes they never come back up. And so, yeah, that I would say, talking to someone and reaching out to people is great, but there is nothing more raw than doing it in the moment with yourself. And yeah, start there.
It's a great place to start. It has to start there anyway, and often end there as well.
Yeah.
So all the viewers out there, you know, if anything, whether you're listening live, we got some really nice comments. I got some nice messages on my phone. If you've been impacted by what you're hearing today, like really feeling and ask yourself, what is it that's impacting you? What is it that's specifically moving you? What are you resonating with? Yeah. And is that a struggle that's in your life right now? And if it is, maybe start like really slowing down and doing some inventory every day, like checking in with yourself.
Yeah, and just sorry to cut, but just one thing that I didn't lead onto when I said that, sorry, is when you do that and you notice some of these things that you're feeling or that you remember you've been through, then you know where to go for support, because you need, you know, you will need support. And so like you were mentioning earlier, there could be groups. It could be a therapist one-on-one. It could be, you know, because you'll be like, okay, this is what I'm carrying. I don't know what to do with it. You know, identifying it, you can do it on your own and with someone, but then you kind of know where to go from there. So yeah, just had to add that, because
absolutely. You know, like whether it's writing, whether it's groups, whether it's therapy, whether it's sitting in the silence of the forest, you know, and allowing yourself to hear yourself, feel yourself. I had a client share that with me today. That's one of the things she learned to do with her anxiety, just to sit in the forest and then to come home and share with her husband what she discovered. It was her first steps towards understanding her anxiety. So yeah, find out what it is that impacted you today, and see if it's still showing up in your life. And if there's any sort of friends or colleagues or family members who are struggling, who you think might enjoy this, please share this podcast with them. If you do like it, please do some exercise with your arm and reach out at that like button and or subscribe, because it really helps us reach more people. But Penny, thank you for taking time out of your busy day to be with us. And for the viewers, we'll see you next week. I don't know what time next week, but we'll be back in next week again. So take care, everybody, and thank you. And Penny, heart blessings and good luck on the journey ahead.
Thank you. Enjoy your day.
Thank you.